This is a tutorial on how to make a jelly plate print. So a jelly plate is a plate that you either buy commercially or you can make yourself. It's basically made from something similar to either Jello gelatin, only not the flavored kind, and glycerin. And you can find recipes for that on the Canvas page if you want to make one yourself. Or you can find, there's tons of recipes online. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people use, instead of gelatin, agar, which is a product that's made from seaweed that acts like gelatin. Basically, these are the things you're going to need. You're going to need the plate, which looks like this. You're going to need a piece of plexiglass, and that's for rolling out your ink. You're going to need a brayer for rolling out your ink. You're going to need some ink. Now, in this case, I'm using acrylic paint. You can try different things, but acrylic paint works well. This is a screen printing ink, which is basically just acrylic paint. Basics acrylic paint brand works pretty good. If you use one of the better acrylics, you're going to want to water it down just a little bit with a little bit of water, so it's a little bit more fluid. You'll find that some acrylics work better than others, but this is basically what we're going to be using for the ink. You're going to need some scissors. You're going to need a substrate to print on. So we're just going to be printing on paper. And then you're going to need something to print, an image to print. So this is from a magazine. That will work. This is a photocopy from an etching of an octopus. So that will work. You can also do methods where you use items to block off the ink and then basically print the silhouettes of those items. So I'm going to show you a couple of different examples. So we're going to start with the photocopy. Now when you select an image, whether it's a photocopy or something from a magazine, something that's high contrast is going to work better. So this could be a photograph. This happens to be an etching. But something high contrast is what you're looking for that's going to work better. So we're going to be printing on paper. So I just have some printmaking paper. This doesn't have to be arches, but it could be just something with a little bit of body. Watercolor paper works really good. You don't want to use, or you probably want to avoid papers that are not as heavy. You can try them, but a paper that's not as heavy, you're going to get warping because of the water involved in this process. Now the other thing you're going to need is some paper towels for cleanup, and you're also going to need a water bottle or maybe a sponge with a bowl of water for cleanup. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get some ink and we're going to put it on the plexiglass. Spoon might be helpful at this point. The ink is a little thick. Okay, so there we go. Just need a little ink. I'm going to take your brayer, just roll that out. Now when you do this, you want to kind of spin your brayer so that it evenly coats, and you probably want to go in multiple directions. If this was an oil-based ink, you would hear that kind of sizzling sound when it gets, perfectly kind of distributed. But with this oil-based screen printing ink, you really don't hear that. And I may have a little bit too much on there, but it's not as critical as when you're doing engraving or etching, for example. Take your plate. Let me move the ink a little forward. you're going to take your plate and you just want to ink this up. Just have a little extra on my finger. Wipe that off. So you just want to ink this up, get a nice coating. I must have had some trash on this brayer. I may stop and redo this. Let's go ahead and see what happens. I might have accidentally gotten some dry ink particles in my ink. Maybe they came from the, I think that's what's happening. I got some dry ink in my ink that came off of the edge of the bottle. That's going to be problematic, potentially, but let's go ahead and do this and we'll see what happens. So, be aware that any kind of anomaly in the ink that's on the plate is going to print. So if you have areas on the plate that are darker, or you have lines from rolling the ink on the plate, that's all going to print. So what I'm worried about are these darker spots, which are dried ink. And I did that by accident. But we're going to go ahead just to show you what will happen. We'll do another one where we do it cleanly. Okay, so lay your brayer aside, and you're going to get your image. So in this case, I'm going to do the octopus. And you're going to drop that onto the ink. And this is the critical part. So what you're trying to do is press the paper into the ink. The parts of the paper that are white that don't have toner on them will pick up a lot of ink, and the parts of the paper that are black that do have toner will just pick up a tiny bit of ink. But the thing to be aware of is you don't want to get really aggressive when you're rubbing this. You want the lightest touch. Now, I'm just basically letting the weight of my finger, I'm not pushing down even, just letting the weight of my finger press down. Now I could print this and I'll get a lot of blue on the edges, but I think that what I'm going to do is get some additional imagery and cover that. So I have this image of a kind of target, and maybe I will, well, actually there's a shell on the other side. Maybe I'll do the shell. So I'm going to put this on there. Yeah, I think I am. I changed my mind. I think I am going to do the target. But I'm going to cut it in half so that it'll, because if I don't cut it in half, you won't see the target on the edge. So I'm going to kind of cover this edge with part of the target. And then the other edge with the other part of the target. And again, you're just rubbing with the lightest of touch. Just the weight of your finger, pretty much. If you press down too much, what will happen is you'll lift up too much of the ink and you won't really get an image. You can test this by looking to see how it's doing. Okay, so I like that. You can see that it left those circular lines. Lift the other side. So left the circular lines. So what's happening is, again, the paper is picking up a lot of ink where there's no toner on the copy paper. And it's just picking up a tiny bit of ink where the toner is. And so because it picks up less ink in the area where the toner is, it leaves that image of this rings. Let's lift up this part. This is where it helps to have a little bit of a fingernail. I'm not quite as happy with that. I think I applied too much pressure. It will make an image though. It's just going to be a little bit of a ghosty looking image. It'll be kind of faded, which can be really beautiful. But I probably, if I didn't want it to be so faded, I applied maybe a little bit too much pressure. Let's take your paper, center your paper above the jelly plate and lower it down. And then you want to apply pressure on the back. You can just do that with your hands. Now, in this case, you want a little bit more pressure. But again, you're not getting too aggressive with this. Just trying to lift the ink off of the surface of the jelly plate onto the paper. It's a mono printing technique. You can check it to see if you think it's doing a good job. And if you like it, then go ahead and pull it all the way up. If you don't like it, put it down and rub some more. I think that looks pretty good though. So we ended up with that as an image. Now these lines that are the concentric circles printed really good because I put a little less pressure, and the jellyfish actually didn't print. It's really subtle. If I get closer to the lens of the camera, you can see that. I kind of like that, but if you want it to be clearer, use less pressure. So I have another copy of that jellyfish, so we'll try another one. Put this aside and let this dry. It'll take about 5 minutes to dry. It's water-based ink. Okay, so you're going to want to clean off the plate. So that's where your water comes in. Just going to squirt a little water on the plate and let that set for a second to loosen up the ink. Get your paper towels. You don't want to be aggressive about this because the surface of this plate is really delicate. So if you get too aggressive, you'll tear up the surface. So basically you're just applying just the slightest amount of pressure. If in doubt, put some more water on it. So I'm going to do a little bit more water. So I've got the plate evenly inked up. Just be aware that any mark that you leave in the ink because of rolling with the brayer or any unevenness is going to show up in the final print. So I have this image of these fish that I'm going to use. So you're going to put this, let's see, put this face down. This is the critical part. You're just barely kind of massaging it, right? So don't get too aggressive with this. Basically, the weight of your finger is enough pressure. I'm really not pressing down at all. Yeah, we'll try that. Take your sheet of paper, center it over the plate, and then rub from the back.
Now again, you're not getting too aggressive, but you want enough pressure that you can pick up the ink from the plate onto the surface of your paper. Some papers are going to work differently than others, so you can experiment with different papers. Check this. This is kind of subtle process, so it's kind of hard to see those in the camera. You might be able to see these on the camera a little better. So that one, same process. I just used pattern as a photocopy. And then this one is a shell. And this one has the first pattern that I showed you with the second print printed over the top of it with the shell. It might be difficult to see that on the camera, but it's a pretty subtle process. You can see it better in person. The other thing that you can do with this is make basically monoprints using stencils. So let me ink the plate again. So in this case, you would need something to act, got a little carried away there, something to act as the stencil. So I have just some string, so I could just put that down. And you could add additional shapes. So I'm just going to cut that kind of star-like shape and we'll put it there. So then to print this, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because of the thickness of that string. So you're going to kind of, press down around the string. And I think we're going to print this twice, so there'll be some residual ink after we print it once. And when you print it again, that's called a ghost, so in printmaking terminology. So we'll also print it again and capture that ghost. So I have that. If we have another sheet of paper. Actually, I wish I would have pulled up the string. Let me do that real quick. Because it has that kind of cool image, right? So we'll do it without the string. This is experimental, so there's a lot of other things you can do. If you just Google search Gelli plate printing, you'll get all kinds of amazing tutorials. So that actually did a much better impression of the string.
But there you have it. Jelly plate printing.